The elderly man risked being arrested to protect a lonely black girl at a gas station. When she finally spoke and revealed her story, everyone who had judged them froze in shame. Rain pelted the cracked asphalt of the gas station parking lot. Sarah stood at the edge of the awning, her small hand pressed against the cold glass of the convenience store window. The fluorescent lights inside cast a harsh glow on her worn floral dress, now slightly damp from the occasional gust that blew water under her minimal shelter. A car pulled up to one of the pumps. Sarah watched as a woman rushed out, swiped her card, and started filling her tank. The woman's eyes briefly met Sarah's, then quickly looked away. Sarah's fingers curled against the glass. 3 hours earlier, her mother had knelt in front of her in their small apartment. "Baby, I have to go to work now." She'd adjusted Sarah's dress collar, her hands trembling slightly. "Remember what we talked about? Stay where it's safe and lit up," Sarah had recited. "Don't talk to strangers unless I need help. Wait for you to come back." Her mother's eyes had filled with tears. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." She pulled Sarah into a tight hug, her nurse's scrub scratching against Sarah's cheek. "When I find someone who can watch you during night shifts, it's okay, Mama." Sarah had put on her bravest smile. "I can take care of myself." Now, as another blast of cold wind swept under the awning, Sarah wished she'd brought her jacket. But it had been warm when her mother dropped her off. The sun still up, the air humid but pleasant. She hadn't expected the temperature to drop so much. The electronic bell chimed as the door opened. A man in a business suit walked out, coffee in hand. His shoes clicked against the concrete as he passed. Sarah caught the words he muttered into his phone. "Yeah, there's some kid hanging around again." Sarah's stomach clenched. She'd learned to read the signs, the sideways glances, the whispered phone calls, the way adults would walk a little faster past her. It usually meant someone was about to tell her to leave. The last place, a 24-hour diner 2 blocks away, had been worse. The waitress had threatened to call the police right away. Sarah had run before anyone could grab her, her heart pounding as she'd splashed through puddles, searching for another safe spot with lights and people. Inside the store, she could see the manager. He kept looking up from his magazine, his eyes narrowing each time they landed on her. Sarah recognized that look. She'd seen it at the diner, at the laundromat, at the minimart near their apartment. It was the look that said, "You don't belong here." A group of teenagers entered the store, laughing and shoving each other. The bell chimed again. Sarah watched through the window as they grabbed sodas and snacks, tossing them onto the counter. The manager smiled at them, chatting as he rang up their purchases. "Hey, who's that little girl?" one of the teens asked, pointing at the window. Sarah stepped back, moving deeper into the shadows at the edge of the awning. The rain had gotten heavier, drumming against the metal above her head. Water streamed from the gutters, forming a curtain that cut her off from the parking lot. Her father would have known what to do. That's what she always thought in moments like this, even though she'd never met him. In her imagination, he was tall and strong, someone who could make all the suspicious looks go away with just a word. But he wasn't here. He'd never been here. The teenagers left, huddled under shared umbrellas, their laughter fading into the sound of rain. Sarah's stomach growled. She had a few dollars in her dress pocket, emergency money her mother had given her, but she was afraid to go inside. Going inside meant the manager would have to look at her directly. Going inside meant he might ask questions she couldn't answer. Through the street glass, she saw him pick up his phone. His mouth moved as he dialed, his eyes fixed on her. Sarah's heart started to race. She knew what happened next. They always called someone, the police, security, anybody who could make her leave. A car door slammed somewhere in the parking lot. Sarah flinched at the sound. The manager was walking toward the door now, phone pressed to his ear. She could see his face clearly. Lips pressed into a thin line, forehead creased with what might have been anger or worry or both. The electronic bell chimed one more time. Sarah's feet felt frozen to the concrete. "Run," her mind screamed. "Run like you did at the diner." But the rain was coming down in sheets now, and she didn't know where else to go. The hospital where her mother worked was too far to walk. The library was closed. The park was dark and scary at night. The manager pushed the door open. The sound of rain got louder. Sarah could hear his shoes on the wet concrete, getting closer. Her chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing it. "Hey," he called out. "Hey, kid." Sarah pressed herself against the wall. Maybe if she made herself small enough, he would change his mind. Maybe if she didn't say anything, he would let her stay just a little longer. Just until the rain let up. Just until she could think of somewhere else to go. Look, the manager said, his voice closer now. I can't have you hanging around here all night. Where are your parents? The question hung in the air between them. Sarah stared at her shoes, old sneakers with cartoon characters that were starting to fade. A car whooshed past on the street, its headlights briefly illuminating the scene. A small black girl in a floral dress, backing away from a middle-aged man with graying hair and a name tag that read store manager in bold letters. I'm going to have to call the police, he said, raising the phone. They can help you find. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Not the police. Her mother had warned her about that. If the police came, they might take her away. They might not let her see her mother again. They might. The manager started dialing. Rain poured from the awning in steady streams, thunder rumbled in the distance. And Sarah stood there, trapped between the wall and the coming storm, watching as the numbers were pressed one by one, each digit bringing her closer to the moment when everything would fall apart. In the parking lot, another car door opened and closed. Footsteps approached through the rain, but Sarah barely heard them over the sound of her own heartbeat, pounding in her ears like the thunder overhead, as she waited for her world to change. This is private property, the manager said, lowering his phone slightly. You can't just stay here all night. Sarah's fingers dug into the rough brick wall behind her. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, mixing with the sound of rain hitting metal. A car pulled up to the pump nearest them, its headlights sweeping across the scene. I'm not doing anything wrong, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. The manager ran a hand through his thinning hair. Listen, kid, I've got a business to run. This isn't a shelter or a daycare. Where's your mother? Your father? The mention of her father made Sarah's chest tighten. She remembered the empty chair at parent-teacher conferences, the blank space on school forms where his name should be, the way her mother's face changed whenever Sarah asked about him. My mama's working, she managed to say. Working? At this hour? Where? Sarah pressed her lips together. Her mother had warned her about giving too much information to strangers. But the manager was already shaking his head, lifting the phone again. That's it. I'm calling the police. They can sort this out. The word police sent a jolt through Sarah's body. She remembered last summer, when officers had come to their old apartment building. They'd taken away Mr. Johnson's kids from 3 doors down. She still heard their crying in her nightmares. Please, she said, her voice cracking. Please don't. Inside the store, customers were starting to gather at the windows. Sarah could see them pointing, whispering. A woman in scrubs, the same light blue color her mother wore, pressed her hand to her mouth, shaking her head. I've seen you here before, the manager continued. Multiple nights now. Just standing here, watching people. It makes customers uncomfortable. I'm just waiting, Sarah said. Mama says to stay where it's safe and lit up. The manager's face softened for a moment, then hardened again. And how long are you supposed to wait? All night? That's not right. That's not safe. More cars were pulling into the station now. The rain had driven people to seek shelter, and the small crowd of observers inside the store was growing. Sarah could hear fragments of their conversations through the glass. Poor thing. But where are her parents? Someone should do something. Isn't this the same girl from last week? The last comment made Sarah's stomach drop. She had thought she'd been careful, moving between different places each night. But people had noticed. They always noticed eventually. Look, the manager said, his voice dropping lower. I get that you might be in a tough situation. But I could get in trouble having a minor hanging around here unsupervised. What if something happened to you? What if a crash of thunder cut him off? Sarah jumped, stumbling slightly. Her shoe slipped on the wet concrete, and she had to catch herself against the wall. The manager reached for her instinctively, then pulled his hand back. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You could get hurt out here. Sarah remembered other nights like this. The McDonald's where the night manager had yelled at her until she ran. The bus station where the security guard had threatened to call child services. The library steps before they installed the sprinklers that came on at random times to drive away people sleeping there. I won't cause any trouble, she pleaded. I'll be quiet. I won't bother anybody. But the manager was already dialing. Sarah watched his fingers press the numbers. 9. 1. The door chime rang again. Someone else was coming out of the store. Sarah heard murmurs, shuffling feet. She wanted to run, but where? The rain was coming down in sheets now, and the nearest shelter was blocks away. Yes, hello? The manager spoke into the phone. I'm calling from the Gas and Go on 5th Street. We have a situation here with an unaccompanied minor. Sarah's legs trembled. She thought about running into the rain, disappearing into the darkness like she had at the diner. But she had promised her mother she would stay where it was safe and lit up. She had promised. The crowd at the window had grown larger. Sarah could see their faces clearly now. Concern, curiosity, judgment. A teenage girl was recording with her phone. An elderly woman was shaking her head. A man in a business suit was checking his watch impatiently. Yes, she's been here multiple nights, the manager continued into the phone. No adult in sight. I'm concerned about, excuse me. A new voice cut through the rain and conversation. Sarah turned her head slightly, still pressing against the wall. Through the curtain of water falling from the awning, she could see someone approaching. An elderly white man in a worn denim shirt, his white hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The manager paused his conversation. Sir, please go back inside. We're handling a situation here. But the old man didn't move. He stood just at the edge of the awning, rain darkening the shoulders of his shirt. His eyes moved from Sarah to the manager, then to the phone, then back to Sarah. Handling it, he said quietly. Looks to me like you're scaring a child half to death. The crowd at the window shifted. Someone opened the door, letting out a burst of air-conditioned air and the low murmur of conversations. Sarah could smell gasoline and wet pavement and the sharp tang of approaching lightning. Sir, the manager said, more firmly this time, this is a business matter. If you're not buying anything, I've been watching for the past 10 minutes. The old man interrupted. Watching that child stand there, hurting no one, while you threaten her with police. Sarah felt something shift in her chest. It wasn't hope. She had learned not to hope too quickly, but it was something close to it. She stole another glance at the old man. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were clear and steady. The manager lowered his phone slightly. You don't understand the liability issues here. If anything happened, the only thing happening right now is you making a scene over a scared little girl trying to stay dry. The old man took a step forward, moving fully under the awning. Where's your humanity, son? A murmur went through the crowd at the window. The manager's face flushed red. My humanity isn't the issue here. The law is the issue. Policy is the issue. Policy. The old man's voice got harder. What policy says we throw children out into the rain? Sarah watched the exchange, her heart pounding. She had seen adults argue over her before, but this was different. The old man wasn't just passing by with a disapproving look. He was standing there in the rain, getting his clothes wet, speaking up. The manager's phone was still at his ear, but he hadn't spoken into it for several seconds. In the distance, Sarah heard something that made her blood run cold. Sirens. Growing closer. The old man heard them too. His expression changed, becoming more urgent. He took another step forward, placing himself between Sarah and the manager. Before those sirens get here, he said quietly. Before you do something you can't undo, think about what happens next. Think about where that child goes. Think about how you'll sleep tonight. The words hung in the rain-heavy air. Sarah could see the manager's internal struggle playing across his face. The phone was still in his hand, but his finger hovered over the disconnect button. The sirens were getting louder. James had watched it all unfold from his car. The small girl in the floral dress, backing away from the manager. The growing crowd of onlookers. The phone call that could change everything. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as memories flooded back. His own daughter, decades ago, scared and alone after her mother left. The police sirens grew louder, their wail cutting through the drumming rain. James saw the girl flinch at the sound, her small body pressing further against the wall. He couldn't stand by anymore. Listen, James said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. I'm not leaving until we figure this out properly. He turned to the manager. You've got my attention now. What exactly is your concern? The manager shifted his weight, phone still in hand. Look, sir, I appreciate what you're trying to do. But, answer the question, James interrupted. What's your specific concern about this child? Red and blue lights began to flash against the wet pavement. A police cruiser pulled into the parking lot, its tires spraying water as it came to a stop. Sarah's eyes went wide with fear. She can't just stay here indefinitely, the manager said, watching the police car. It's not safe. It's not legal. Two officers stepped out into the rain, their uniforms quickly becoming speckled with water. The taller one spoke into his radio while the other approached the awning, hand resting casually on his belt. "Evening, folks," the officer said. "We got a call about an unaccompanied minor." James stepped forward, positioning himself more firmly between Sarah and the newcomers. "There's been a misunderstanding, officer." "Sir, please step aside," the officer said, his tone professional but firm. "No, I don't think I will." James kept his voice calm. "Not until we discuss this rationally." The second officer joined them under the awning. Water dripped from his hat as he surveyed the scene. "Sir, interfering with a police investigation." "Investigation?" James let out a short laugh. "Of what crime?" "A child trying to stay dry." Inside the store, phones were out, recording. The crowd had grown larger, pressing against the windows. Sarah remained frozen against the wall, her eyes darting between the adults around her. "Your name, sir?" the first officer asked James. "James Morrison, former high school teacher, current retiree, and someone who's not going to watch a child get traumatized tonight." The officer pulled out a notepad, writing despite the rain that speckled the pages. "And you know this child?" "No," James admitted, "but I know fear when I see it. And I know right from wrong." The manager stepped forward. "Officers, she's been here multiple nights. Just standing, watching. Customers are concerned." "Concerned about what?" James demanded. "Have you ever asked her why she's here? Have you ever offered help instead of threats?" The second officer moved closer to Sarah, who shrank back. "Sweetie, can you tell us your name?" Sarah's lips trembled. Sarah," she whispered. "Sarah," the officer repeated, writing it down. "And where's your mom or dad?" "Sarah. My mama's working," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Working where?" the officer pressed. James watched Sarah's face. He saw the conflict there, the desire to tell the truth warring with fear. He remembered that look. He'd seen it on his daughter's face the night she finally told him about the bullying at school. "Officers," James said, "before we continue this interrogation of a frightened child, may I make a suggestion?" Both officers looked at him. The manager crossed his arms. The crowd at the window grew quieter, straining to hear. "Instead of treating this like a crime scene, why don't we treat it like what it is, a child trying to stay safe while her mother works? Why don't we ask what we can do to help instead of making things worse?" The first officer sighed. "Sir, we have protocols." "Protocols?" James felt his patience wearing thin. "When I was raising my daughter alone, working 2 jobs, you know what saved us? People who were willing to look past protocols. People who saw a need and filled it." Rain continued to pour from the awning's edge, creating a curtain of water around them. A car pulled into the station, its headlights sweeping across the scene. The driver took one look and pulled away without stopping. "The law requires us to contact child services in situations like this," the second officer said, still writing in his notepad. Sarah made a small, frightened sound. James saw her eyes dart toward the darkness beyond the station's lights, calculating escape routes. "Don't," he said softly to her. "Don't run. That'll only make things worse." He turned back to the officers. "Give me 5 minutes. Let me talk to her. Let me talk to the manager. There has to be a better solution than destroying this family." The officers exchanged looks. The manager shifted uncomfortably. Inside the store, someone pressed a hand against the glass, leaving a foggy handprint. 5 minutes, the first officer finally said. "But we stay right here." James nodded, then slowly approached Sarah. He kept his movements deliberate, non-threatening. When he was close enough, he crouched down despite his creaking knees, bringing himself to her eye level. "Sarah," he said gently, "I know you're scared. I know everyone here probably seems like a threat right now. But I want to help. Can you tell me about your mama? About why you're here?" Sarah looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "She works at the hospital," she whispered. "Night shifts. She tries to find someone to watch me. But sometimes there's no one," James finished. He understood. He remembered those nights, scrambling for childcare, making impossible choices. The manager had moved closer, listening. His face had lost some of its hardness. "The hospital?" he asked. "You mean County General?" Sarah nodded. "That's 4 blocks from here," the manager said, more to himself than anyone else. James saw an opening. So she chose the closest safe, well-lit place for her daughter to wait. A place with people, with cameras, with shelter from the rain. He looked up at the manager. She's trying her best. The rain seemed to fall harder, drumming against the awning. The officers waited, notepads getting damp in their hands. The crowd at the window had grown silent, watching. "How long?" the manager asked Sarah. "How long do you usually wait?" "Until 3, Sarah said quietly. "That's when Mama's shift ends. She comes straight here to get me." James checked his watch. It was just past midnight. He looked at the manager, at the officers, at the faces pressed against the glass. He saw the moment of decision approaching, balanced on a knife's edge. "We can make this work," he said firmly. "We can find a way that keeps everyone safe and legal. But first, we have to choose to help instead of hurt." Thunder rolled overhead, a low growl that seemed to emphasize his words. Sarah's hand found the edge of his denim shirt, holding on like a lifeline. The manager looked at his phone, still displaying the half-dialed 911 call. He looked at the officers, at James, at Sarah. Then, slowly, he pressed the end call button. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, let's talk about options." The officers moved in closer, their boots squeaking on the wet concrete. The taller one, whose nameplate read Officer Martinez, pulled out his radio again. "Dispatch, we're going to need child services contacted." He glanced at his watch. "See if they can send someone out tonight." "Wait," James said, standing up slowly, his knees protesting. "That's not necessary. We can." "Sir," Officer Martinez cut him off. "Step back from the child." The crowd at the window had their phones up now, recording everything. Sarah's fingers tightened in James's shirt. "I'm not going anywhere," James said firmly. The second officer, shorter and broader, moved to flank them. "Sir, you're making this situation more complicated than it needs to be." Inside the store, a woman in medical scrubs pushed through the crowd and came outside. Rain speckled her light blue uniform as she approached. "I work at County General," she said, her voice carrying over the storm. "Night shift, like her mother." "This isn't right. You can't just—" Officer Martinez interrupted. "Please stay back. This is a police matter now." The manager shifted uncomfortably. "Look, maybe I overreacted. If we could just—" "You did the right thing calling us," the second officer said. "This kind of situation, well, we've seen it go bad before." James felt Sarah trembling beside him. "What exactly are you implying, officer?" A new voice came from the crowd. "Yeah, we all know what they're implying." A young black man in a business suit stepped out of the store. Elderly white man, young black girl. They've already made up their minds. The tension under the awning ratcheted up another notch. James saw the officers' hands drift toward their belts. "Sir," Officer Martinez started. "No, let's be honest here," the man in the suit continued. "If this was a little white girl with her grandfather, would we even be having this conversation?" Rain drummed against the metal awning. Car headlights swept across the scene as vehicles slowed to look, then sped away. The night had become a fishbowl, with everyone watching, everyone judging. "This isn't about race," the second officer said stiffly. "This is about an unaccompanied minor." "Everything's about race," the man in the suit shot back. "Every single—" "Stop it." Sarah's voice cut through the argument, surprisingly strong. "Please, just stop it." Everyone fell silent. Sarah stepped forward slightly, though she kept hold of James's shirt. "My mama works at the hospital," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "She's a nurse in the emergency room. She helps people all night. She tries so hard to find someone to watch me, but sometimes she can't, and we don't have money for a babysitter." And her voice broke. James put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, Sarah. Take your breath." The nurse in scrubs moved closer. "I think I've seen your mother. Tall woman, always stays late if we're short-staffed. Works extra shifts whenever she can." Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes with her free hand. "That's Maria, isn't it?" the nurse continued. "Maria Johnson." Another nod. The nurse turned to the officers. "I know her. She's one of our best." Works herself to the bone taking care of people. That may be true, Officer Martinez said. But leaving a child alone at night is still. What choice does she have? James demanded. Work and keep her daughter fed, or stay home and watch them both end up on the street. Lightning flashed, followed by a sharp crack of thunder. Several people jumped. The storm was getting closer. We still need to contact child services, the second officer insisted. Protocol, the man in the suit scoffed. Protocol is going to tear apart another family? Put another black child in the system. The manager, who had been quiet for a while, suddenly spoke up. What if there was another way? All eyes turned to him. What if we could work something out? He continued. Some kind of arrangement. Sir, Officer Martinez said, I'm suggesting we use some common sense. The manager cut in. We have cameras everywhere. Security system. Staff always present. If the girl needs a safe place to wait for her mother, James felt a small surge of hope. You'd allow that? The manager ran a hand through his hair. I don't know. There would have to be rules. Supervision. Something official. I can help with that, James said quickly. I'm retired. Live just around the corner. I could. Hold on, the second officer interrupted. You expect us to just leave a child with a complete stranger? The nurse stepped forward again. Then let's not make him a stranger. I'll vouch for him. I'll help watch Sarah too, when I'm not on shift. We can create a network. More thunder rumbled overhead. The rain had begun to slack off slightly, but the air felt heavy with tension. Officers, James said quietly, you have a choice here. You can tear apart a family trying to survive, or you can help build a community to support them. The man in the suit nodded. He's right. And whatever you decide, all these people, he gestured to the crowd with their phones. They are watching. They are recording. They'll remember what happened here tonight. Officer Martinez looked at his partner, then at his radio, then at Sarah. His face showed the internal struggle. If we don't call child services, he said slowly, we need some kind of documentation. Some proof that this is legitimate. I can draw up an agreement, the manager offered. Something in writing about supervision and responsibilities. And you'd need to verify the mother's employment, the second officer added. Get her contact information. Sarah had been watching this exchange, her grip on James's shirt gradually loosening. You won't take me away? The question hung in the rain-heavy air. James felt his heart twist at the fear in her voice. Officer Martinez sighed heavily. Not if we can find a better solution. But this has to be done right. No shortcuts. The crowd at the window had grown larger. James could see them watching, waiting, their faces reflecting in the rain-streaked glass. This moment would ripple out, he knew. This decision would change more than just one night. Then let's do it right, he said firmly. Right now. Tonight. The storm continued its assault on the gas station's awning, but beneath it, something was shifting. The atmosphere had changed from confrontation to possibility, from suspicion to cautious hope. But James could still feel Sarah trembling beside him, and he knew they weren't safe yet. The night wasn't over. The real work was just beginning. The manager unlocked the staff room door, flicking on fluorescent lights that hummed to life. We can talk in here, he said, gesturing everyone inside. Out of the rain. Sarah hesitated at the threshold, still holding onto James's shirt. The small room smelled of coffee and cleaning supplies. A scratched table sat in the center, surrounded by folding chairs. It's okay, James said softly. I'm right here. They filed in, James and Sarah, the two officers, the manager, the nurse in scrubs, and the man in the business suit who'd spoken up outside. Water dripped from their clothes onto the linoleum floor. First things first, Officer Martinez said, pulling out his notepad again. We need to contact the mother. The nurse, who had introduced herself as Nancy, spoke up. I can call the ER directly. Maria should be on her break soon. While Nancy stepped into the corner with her phone, the manager grabbed some paper towels from a dispenser and started wiping down chairs. Sit, please, he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. His name tag, James noticed now, read Frank. Sarah perched on the edge of a chair, her wet dress leaving a damp mark. James sat next to her, while the others arranged themselves around the table. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on everyone's faces. Maria? Nancy's voice cut through the awkward silence. It's Nancy from the ER. No, No, Sarah's fine. She's safe. But we need you to come to the gas and go on 5th. Yes, that one. As soon as you can get away. I know you're short-staffed. But this is important. The second officer, who'd finally introduced himself as Officer Chen, was writing something in his notebook. We'll need employment verification, he said. Proof of income, work schedule. She works 3 jobs, Sarah said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. The hospital at night, the pharmacy in the morning, and sometimes she cleans offices on weekends. James felt his chest tighten. He remembered those days, the endless hustle, the constant exhaustion, the guilt of never being there enough. 3 jobs. Frank, the manager, repeated, something changing in his expression. Nancy ended her call. Maria's trying to get someone to cover for her. She'll be here as soon as she can. She looked at Sarah. Your mom's worried sick. Honey, I didn't mean to worry her, Sarah whispered. I just didn't want to get her in trouble. No one's in trouble, James said firmly, looking pointedly at the officers. We're just trying to figure things out. Officer Martinez leaned forward. Sarah, how long has this been going on? These nights at the gas station. Sarah stared at her hands in her lap. Since Miss Betty got sick. Miss Betty? Officer Chen prompted. Our neighbor. She used to watch me at night. But then she got sick and had to go live with her daughter in Florida. Sarah's voice got smaller. That was 3 weeks ago. Frank, the manager, rubbed his face. 3 weeks. You've been coming here for 3 weeks. Sarah nodded. Not every night. Sometimes Mama finds someone. Or sometimes she can switch shifts. But mostly, she trailed off. The man in the suit, Michael, he'd said to call him, spoke up. So a single mother working 3 jobs loses her childcare and has to make an impossible choice. And instead of helping, we're sitting here treating her like a criminal. No one's treating anyone like a criminal, Officer Martinez started, but Nancy cut him off. Aren't we? Look at this room. Look at how we're all sitting here interrogating a scared little girl instead of asking how we can help. Rain drummed against the small window in the corner. Thunder rolled in the distance, more distant now but still threatening. Maria's one of our best nurses, Nancy continued. Do you know how many lives she's saved? How many people she's helped? And this is how we repay her? By threatening to take her daughter away. The law? Officer Chen began. The law can go to hell, Michael snapped. I grew up in the system. You know what happens to kids who get taken from good parents just because they are poor. You want to talk about trauma? Sarah's hand found James's arm again. He could feel her trembling. What if, Frank said slowly, what if we made this official? A proper arrangement? He looked at Sarah. You said you come here because it's safe. Lit up. Has people around? Sarah nodded. Well, we have that security camera system I mentioned. Always have at least 2 staff members on duty. And if Mr. Morrison is willing to help supervise. He looked at James questioningly. James, he corrected. And yes, I am. Like I said, I live just around the corner. Officer Martinez frowned. We need background checks, insurance coverage, written agreements. Then let's do it, Nancy said. I'll help too. We can set up a schedule. Make sure someone's always here with her. I can stop by on my way home from the office, Michael offered. I pass here anyway. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. These strangers, these people who minutes ago had been ready to call child services, were now offering to help. The door opened, letting in the sound of rain and a gust of cool air. A woman stood in the doorway, her blue scrubs damp, her face tight with worry. Mama! Sarah jumped up, running to her. Maria Johnson caught her daughter in a fierce hug, lifting her off her feet. Baby, are you okay? Are you hurt? I'm okay, Mama. These people, they want to help us. Maria looked around the room, her arms still tight around Sarah. James could see the fear in her eyes, the expectation of judgment, of punishment. Mrs. Johnson, Frank said, standing up. Please, sit down. We're trying to work something out. Maria settled into a chair, pulling Sarah onto her lap despite her daughter being almost too big for it. I can explain. No need, James interrupted gently. We understand. Better than you might think. But the police. Maria's eyes darted to the officers. I'm here to help make sure everything's done properly, Officer Martinez said, his tone softer than before. No one's getting arrested. No one's getting taken away. Maria's shoulders sagged with relief. Sarah leaned against her mother's chest, and for the first time that night, her face showed something other than fear. "Tell us what you need," Nancy said to Maria. "Tell us how we can help make this work." Outside, the storm was finally beginning to pass. The rain had softened to a gentle patter, and the thunder was just a distant murmur. Inside the small break room, something else was happening. Something unexpected and fragile and real. A community was forming, right there under the harsh fluorescent lights. And Sarah, watching from the safety of her mother's arms, began to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Maria's hands shook as she filled out the employment verification form Officer Martinez had given her. The break room's clock ticked loudly on the wall. 1:47 a.m. She should have been checking on patients, not sitting here explaining her life to strangers. "I picked up the pharmacy job 2 months ago," she said, pen scratching against paper. "When they raised our rent, the cleaning work that started after Sarah's school raised their aftercare fees." Sarah sat next to her mother, shoulders touching, as if afraid they'd be separated at any moment. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. "How many hours do you sleep?" Nancy asked softly. Maria gave a bitter laugh. "Sleep? Between shifts, I guess. On the bus sometimes." She looked down at her daughter. "It's not ideal, I know. But what choice do I have?" "There are programs," Officer Chen started, but Michael cut him off. "Programs with 2-year waiting lists," he said. "Programs that need 5 different forms of ID and proof of residence and income statements and dash." He stopped himself, straightening his tie. "Sorry, I've been there." Frank, the manager, had been quiet for a while, staring at his hands folded on the table. Finally, he spoke. "I lost my wife 3 years ago." Everyone turned to look at him. "Cancer," he continued, "left me with 2 teenagers and bills I couldn't pay. Had to sell our house, move into a 1-bedroom apartment. Worked every shift I could get." He looked at Maria. "I understand impossible choices." The rain had almost stopped outside, just a gentle patter against the window now. Somewhere in the distance, an ambulance siren wailed, probably heading to County General, where Maria should have been. "I need to get back," she said, checking her watch. "The O's short-staffed tonight, and dash, Mrs. Johnson," Officer Martinez interrupted. "We need to finish this paperwork first. We need to establish a clear plan before dash." "A plan?" Maria's voice cracked. "You want a plan? Here's my plan. Work until I can't stand, sleep when I can, do whatever it takes to keep my daughter fed and housed and safe." She gripped the pen tighter. "You think I like leaving her alone? You think I don't lie awake during those precious few hours of sleep, terrified something will happen to her?" Sarah reached for her mother's hand. "Mama, don't cry." But the tears were already falling. Maria wiped them away angrily with her sleeve. "I'm trying. God knows I'm trying. But everything just keeps getting harder. Rent goes up, food gets more expensive, school fees, bus fare, uniforms." She took a shaky breath. "And now you're all sitting here judging me, threatening to take my baby dash." "No one is taking anyone," James said firmly. He leaned forward, making sure Maria met his eyes. "Look around this room. Every person here wants to help. Really help, not just write you up or file you away in some system." Nancy nodded. "We can create a schedule. I'm here most nights anyway. When I'm not, there's plenty of other hospital staff who pass by." "I already said I'll stop in on my way home," Michael added. "My office is just downtown." "And I'm retired," James said. "Time is the one thing I have plenty of." Frank cleared his throat. "The store's open 24/7. Security cameras everywhere. Always at least 2 staff members on duty." He paused. "We could set up the break room. Make it comfortable. A place to do homework maybe." Sarah's eyes widened at that. "Really? I could do my homework here. Better than trying to do it on the bus between your mimars shifts. Right?" Maria looked around the room, taking in each face. The officers with their forms and protocols. The nurse who worked alongside her. The businessman in his expensive suit. The elderly man who'd stood in the rain to protect her daughter. The manager who'd almost called child services but was now offering his break room as a study space. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you all do this?" "Because it's right," James said simply. "Because we've been there," Frank added. "Because your daughter deserves better than hiding in the rain," Nancy said. "Because the system is broken," Michael put in. "But people don't have to be." Officer Martinez set down his pen. Mrs. Johnson, what these folks are proposing, it's unorthodox. But if we document it properly, create a clear supervision schedule, establish emergency protocols. He looked at his partner. Officer Chen nodded slowly. It could work. It would need to be monitored, evaluated regularly. But it could work. The clock ticked, 2:03 a.m. Maria needed to get back to her patients. Sarah was fighting to keep her eyes open, the night's emotions finally catching up with her. I can't pay you, Maria said. I barely make enough to dash. No one's asking for payment, James interrupted gently. We take care of our own, Nancy added. Frank stood up suddenly. Wait here. He disappeared into the store, returning a few minutes later with an armful of supplies, a small fold-up table, a lamp, some cushions for the hard break room chairs. For homework, he explained, setting everything down. And maybe we could clear out that storage cabinet, make a place for books and supplies. Sarah stared at the items, then at Frank, then at her mother. Mama! Maria was crying again, but differently now. She pulled Sarah close, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. I don't know what to say, she managed. Say yes, James suggested. Say yes, and let us help. Thunder rumbled one last time, distant and fading. The storm that had brought them all together was moving on. But what it had created in this small break room, this unlikely alliance of strangers, was just beginning. Maria looked down at the forms in front of her, then at her daughter, then at the faces around the table. She picked up the pen again, her hand steady now. Yes, she said softly. Yes. The next evening, James arrived at the gas station just before sunset, carrying a worn backpack. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the smell of fresh coffee hit him. Frank looked up from behind the counter. Right on time, Frank said, reaching under the counter. He pulled out a new key card. For the break room. Had it made this morning. James took the card, its plastic surface still shiny and unmarked. Everything ready back there. Take a look. Frank gestured toward the break room. Did some rearranging this afternoon. The break room had transformed since the night before. The fold-up table now sat in the corner, properly assembled, with the lamp casting a warm glow. The harsh overhead fluorescents had been replaced with softer bulbs. A small bookshelf, actually just a repurposed storage cabinet, stood against one wall. It's not much, Frank said from the doorway. But it's better than standing in the rain. James set his backpack down. Mind if I add a few things? He unzipped the bag and started pulling out items. Some paperback books, a pack of colored pencils, a few comic books he'd found in his basement. Last came an old checkerboard, its corners worn smooth with age. Used to play with my daughter, he explained, setting it on the table. Thought Sarah might like it. Frank watched him arrange the items. You really meant it, didn't you? About helping. Did you think I was just talking to keep the cops happy? Honestly, I didn't know what to think. Frank leaned against the doorframe. People say a lot of things in the heat of the moment. Promises are easy at 2 in the morning. The store's bell chimed. Through the break room window, they could see Nancy walking in, still in her scrubs, carrying what looked like a lunchbox. Evening, Frank, she called out. James, you're both early too. Huh. She joined them in the break room, setting the lunchbox on the table. Brought some snacks. Hospital cafeteria always makes too many sandwiches anyway. James checked his watch. Maria's shift starts at 7. Nancy nodded. She'll drop Sarah off on her way. I got a late shift myself, so I'll be passing by a few times tonight. And I'll be here until midnight, Frank added. Day manager's been briefed about the situation too. More footsteps approached. Michael appeared in the doorway, his suit slightly rumpled after a long day at the office. Room for one more. Thought you weren't coming until later, James said. Meeting finished early. Michael loosened his tie. Brought something too. He pulled a tablet from his briefcase. It's an old one, but it still works. Figured it might help with homework. They all stood there for a moment, looking at the transformed space. The checkerboard ready for games. The books waiting to be read. The snacks and drinks arranged neatly on a small shelf. The tablet propped up next to the lamp. It wasn't much. Nothing in the room was new or expensive. But together it felt like something important. The bell chimed again. Maria walked in, Sarah holding her hand. They both stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. Oh, Maria said softly. Sarah let go of her mother's hand and walked slowly into the room, touching each new edition. Her fingers trailed over the checkerboard, the books, the lamp casting its warm glow. Is this all for me?" she asked. "For homework," Frank said quickly, as if embarrassed by his kindness. "And, whatever else you need." Maria stood frozen, her eyes wet. "I don't know how to thank you all." "No thanks needed," James said, "though I wouldn't say no to a checker game later." He winked at Sarah. "If you're up for learning." Sarah smiled, the first real smile they'd seen from her. "I already know how to play. Miss Betty taught me." "Well then," James said, pulling out a chair, "you'll have to teach me her tricks." Maria checked her watch reluctantly. "I have to go." "The shift." "Go," Nancy said gently. "We've got this." Sarah hugged her mother tightly. "Love you, Mama." "Love you too, baby." Maria looked at the others. "Thank you." "Just, thank you." After she left, Sarah sat at the table, running her hands over the checkerboard. "Can we play now?" "Homework first," James said, trying to sound stern but failing. "Then checkers." Sarah pulled out her math workbook. "Will you help me? There's fractions." "Fractions?" Michael stepped forward. "That's my specialty. Mind if I join?" They settled into an easy rhythm. Sarah worked on her math while Michael explained fractions using snacks from Nance's lunchbox as visual aids. James organized the bookshelf, occasionally offering encouragement. Frank came in and out, checking on them between customers. Around 9, Nancy stopped by during her break. She found them deep in a checker game, Sarah clearly winning. "She's a shark," James complained good-naturedly. 3 games in a row now. Sarah grinned, moving another piece. "King me." The night passed differently than all those nights before. No more standing alone in the rain. No more hiding from suspicious looks. No more fear of being chased away. Instead, there were math problems solved with shared snacks. Stories read aloud in funny voices. Checker games won and lost. Simple things, normal things. But they felt like miracles in this converted break room. At midnight, when Frank's shift ended, he didn't leave right away. He stood in the doorway watching Sarah explain a complicated checker strategy to James, her hands moving animatedly as she talked. He said quietly to Nancy, who was finishing her coffee before heading back to her shift. "I almost called the cops on her. Almost made that call that would have—" "But you didn't," Nancy interrupted. "And look what happened instead." What happened instead was this: a safe place. A community. A little girl doing homework under warm lamplight instead of hiding in shadows. A single mother knowing her daughter was protected. Strangers becoming something more than strangers. Later, when Maria came to pick up Sarah, she found her daughter asleep on the small couch they'd brought in, a comic book open on her chest, the checkerboard showing her latest victory. James looked up from his own book. She finished all her homework. Even the fractions. Maria gathered her sleeping daughter in her arms, stronger than she looked from years of lifting patience. "Thank you," she whispered, not for the first or last time that night. "See you tomorrow," James said simply. Because that was the miracle of it. There would be a tomorrow, and another after that. More homework sessions and checker games. More shared snacks and stories. More nights of safety and community in this unlikely sanctuary. As they left, Sarah stirred slightly. "Can we play checkers again tomorrow?" "Of course, baby." Maria held her daughter close. "You got a whole room of people waiting to lose to you." The gas station's lights glowed steadily in the dark, a beacon now instead of a last resort. Inside, James and the others cleaned up, preparing for the next day, the next small miracle in this place that had become so much more than just a break room. It wasn't a perfect solution. Maria still worked too many hours. Sarah still had to spend her evenings away from home. The world outside hadn't magically become easier or fairer. But in this one place, on this one night, something had changed. Something small but vital, like a single light burning in the darkness, saying, "You are not alone." 2 weeks passed. The break room became Sarah's second home, its routines as familiar as her own heartbeat. Every evening, she'd walk in with her backpack, and someone would be waiting, James with his checkerboard, Nancy with hospital cafeteria snacks, Michael with his patient explanations of math problems, or Frank checking in between customers. Tonight, Sarah sat at the homework table, frowning at her social studies worksheet. James watched from his usual chair, a cup of coffee cooling beside him. The Civil War ended in what year? Sarah read aloud. You know this one? James encouraged. Remember the timeline we made last week? Sarah's face lit up. 1865. She wrote it down carefully, then looked up. James, can I ask you something? Always. Why did you help me? That first night, in the rain. James set down his coffee cup. Through the break room window, he could see Frank restocking shelves, other customers coming and going in the fluorescent-lit store beyond. Because someone helped me once, he said finally. When my wife left, and I was trying to raise Amy, that's my daughter, by myself. People stepped up. Neighbors, teachers, even strangers sometimes. He smiled slightly. You know what they say about paying it forward? Sarah tilted her head. What's that mean? It means when someone helps you, you help someone else later. Keep the kindness moving. The door opened, and Nancy walked in, still buttoning her nurse's coat. Evening, everyone. Sarah, your mom says you have a science test tomorrow. Yeah. Sarah held up her textbook. About the solar system. Well, you're in luck. Nancy sat down, pulling out her lunchbox. I brought brain food. Can't study on an empty stomach. She unpacked sandwiches cut into star shapes, clearly done with medical precision. Sarah giggled. Stars for studying stars. Exactly. Nancy distributed the sandwiches. Now, tell me about the planets. They settled into their study session. Sarah recited facts about Mars and Jupiter while Nancy asked questions and James occasionally chimed in. The gas station's regular noises provided a steady background. Bells chiming, cars pulling up to pumps, the hum of refrigerators. Around 8, Michael arrived, looking tired but smiling. How's the future astronaut doing? I got all the planets memoized, Sarah announced proudly. Even the dwarf ones. Better than me. Michael loosened his tie. I can barely remember my own phone number after today's meetings. Frank stuck his head in. Anyone need anything? Making a fresh pot of coffee. Please, Nancy and Michael said in unison. Sarah went back to her studying, but James noticed her glancing at the clock more frequently. He knew what she was waiting for, what she always waited for around this time. Right on schedule, the door chimed again. Maria walked in, wearing her pharmacy uniform. She had 30 minutes between jobs, just enough time to check on Sarah before heading to her hospital shift. Mama! Sarah jumped up for a hug. I learned all the planets. Maria held her daughter tight. That's wonderful, baby. You'll ace that test tomorrow. She looked tired. She always looked tired. But there was less strain around her eyes these days. Less fear. The dark circles were still there, the exhaustion of working 3 jobs still evident. But something else had changed. Coffee. Frank appeared with fresh cups for everyone. God, yes. Maria sank into a chair. Thank you, Frank. They all sat together, drinking coffee, hot chocolate for Sarah, and listening to Sarah explain the solar system. It was a small moment, ordinary in many ways. But James saw Maria's eyes grow damp as she watched her daughter, confident and happy, surrounded by people who cared. Oh! Sarah suddenly remembered something. Mama, can I show you what we did to the cabinet? She pulled her mother over to the repurposed storage unit. What had started as a simple bookshelf had evolved. Sarah's drawings now decorated the doors. Small labels marked different sections. Homework help, fun books, games and puzzles. Look, Sarah said proudly, opening one door. We organized everything. And Miss Nancy helped me make a sign-out sheet. Like a real library. Maria touched one of the drawings, a crayon sketch of all of them sitting around the table. It's beautiful, baby. A customer called for Frank, and he hurried out. Michael checked some emails on his phone. Nancy reviewed her patient notes. Normal things, everyday things, but all of them staying close, staying present, being there. I have to go, Maria said eventually, checking her watch. Hospital shift. I'll walk you out, Nancy offered. My break's almost over anyway. Sarah hugged her mother goodbye, no longer with the desperate grip of those early days. Now it was a secure hug, confident in the knowledge that she was safe, that she was cared for. After they left, Sarah returned to her science textbook. James, will you quiz me about the planets again? One condition, he said solemnly. Check us after. Deal. The night continued. Sarah mastered the solar system. The checker game ended in another victory for her, You're getting better, though, she assured James. Michael helped her start on tomorrow's math homework. Frank brought them all fresh drinks. Around 11, Officer Martinez stopped by, not to check up on them officially, but because it had become part of his regular patrol route. "How's our star student?" he asked, accepting a coffee from Frank. "Did you know that Jupiter has 79 moons?" Sarah told him excitedly. "No kidding? 79?" He whistled. "Learn something new every day." Later, after Sarah had fallen asleep on the small couch, now equipped with a proper pillow and blanket, James sat with Frank at the counter. "You know what I realized?" Frank said quietly. "We were all so worried about liability, about what could go wrong. But look what went right instead." James nodded. Through the break room window, they could see Sarah sleeping peacefully, her science textbook still open beside her. "Sometimes," James said, "doing the right thing is more important than doing the official thing." The gas station's lights hummed steadily. Cars came and went outside. The world continued its normal rhythms, but in this space, this converted break room that had become something more, a different kind of normal had taken root. It wasn't perfect. Maria still worked too many hours. Sarah still had to spend her evenings away from home. The larger problems, poverty, inequality, the struggles of single parents, remained unsolved. But here, in this small corner of the world, a community had formed. A safety net had been woven. A child had found protection, not from one person, but from many, each contributing what they could, when they could. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. 1 month after that rainy night, Sarah stood on a chair in the break room, carefully pinning something to the bulletin board. James watched from his usual spot, pretending to read his newspaper. "Tardier." Sarah stepped back, revealing her science test with a big red A+ at the top. "Would you look at that?" James folded his newspaper. "Jupiter's 79 moons really stuck." "Huh. 80 actually," Sarah corrected. "Scientists found a new one. Michael showed me the article yesterday." The break room had evolved over the past month. Sarah's artwork covered most walls now. A proper desk had replaced the fold-up table. The bookshelf, still technically a repurposed storage cabinet, was full of textbooks, novels, and games, many donated by regular customers who'd learned about the unusual arrangement. Frank walked in, carrying a fresh pot of coffee. "Is that the science test?" "Let me see." Sarah beamed as Frank examined her grade. Through the window, they could see the usual evening rush at the gas station. Cars pulling in and out, customers buying coffee and snacks, the normal rhythm of the place. "Mrs. Peterson wants to put it on the star student's wall," Sarah said, climbing down from the chair. "But I wanted it here first." "Star student is right," Nancy said, appearing in the doorway still in her scrubs. "Your mom's going to be so proud." Sarah's face lit up. "Can we call her?" "She's at the pharmacy today." "Already done," Frank said, pulling out his phone. "Texted her a picture as soon as you walked in." The door chimed again, and Michael hurried in, slightly out of breath. "Did I miss the test reveal?" "Just in time," James said. "Pull up a chair." Sarah was about to tell us about that new Jupiter moon. They gathered around the table, their usual spots now, worn comfortable with routine. Sarah pulled out her astronomy book, the pages dog-eared and marked with sticky notes. "Actually," she said, "can I show you something else first?" She reached into her backpack and pulled out a piece of paper. "We had to write about our family for English class." The adults exchanged glances. They knew about Sarah's father, about the empty spaces in her family tree. "Want to read it to us?" Nancy asked gently. Sarah nodded and began to read. My Family by Sarah Johnson. "Some people think family just means the people you live with. But I learned that family can be bigger than that. My family starts with my mama, who works 3 jobs to take care of me. She's the strongest person I know. But my family is also James, who teaches me checkers and helps me with homework and never gets mad when I beat him at games. It's Miss Nancy, who brings star-shaped sandwiches and knows everything about science. It's Mr. Frank, who gave me a safe place to study and always has hot chocolate ready. It's Michael, who explains math better than my teacher and brings me articles about space. It's Officer Martinez, who stops by to check on us and tells funny stories about his dog. It's all the people who turned a scary night into something good. My teacher asked if I felt sad about having a non-traditional family. But I told her I feel lucky instead, because my family chose me. They chose to help when they didn't have to. They chose to care. Some people have a family they are born into. I have a family that grew around me, like stars forming a constellation. And just like stars, they helped me find my way home. Sarah looked up from her paper. The room was very quiet except for the distant sounds of the gas station. Nancy wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Michael stared intently at his coffee cup. Frank had turned away, pretending to organize something on the shelf. James cleared his throat. That's quite a composition, Sarah. Got an A on that too, she said proudly, then frowned. Are you crying, James? Just old man allergies, he said gruffly. Must be dust in here. The door opened, and Maria walked in wearing her pharmacy uniform. Did I miss the science test celebration? Mama! Sarah ran to hug her. I got an A+, and I read my essay. Maria held her daughter close, looking around the room at all the damp eyes and poorly hidden emotions. I see that. She smiled. Looks like it was a hit. Your daughter, James said, finally giving up on hiding his tears, is quite the writer. And quite the scientist, Nancy added. And quite the mathematician, Michael chimed in. And quite the checker champion, Frank said, turning back from the shelf, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Maria looked at her daughter, then at all of them. She's right. You know what she wrote about family being more than blood. Sarah tugged her mother's hand. Come see where I put the test. And I organized all my space books, and Michael brought a new article about black holes, and James finally won a checker game yesterday. I let you win the last 3 weeks, James protested. I was just lulling you into a false sense of security. Everyone laughed, the emotional moment breaking into something warmer, easier. They settled into their usual routine, homework first, then games, shared snacks, and conversations that flowed as naturally as breathing. Later that evening, Officer Martinez stopped by on his patrol. Here we've got a scientist in the making. Want to learn about Jupiter's new moon? Sarah asked eagerly. You bet. But first, he pulled something from behind his back. The chief heard about your grades. He wanted you to have this. It was a junior police badge, not a toy but a real honorary badge, engraved with Sarah's name. Really? Sarah's eyes were huge. Really? He says we need more smart kids like you keeping an eye on things. Sarah pinned the badge carefully to her shirt, then hugged Officer Martinez, surprising him and everyone else. He patted her back awkwardly, his tough police exterior cracking just a bit. The night continued. Sarah did her homework with Michael's help. Nancy shared stories from the hospital. Frank kept them supplied with drinks and snacks. James lost another checker game. On purpose, he insisted. Around midnight, Maria came back from her hospital shift to pick up Sarah, who had fallen asleep on her science book. I can't believe how much has changed, Maria said softly, watching her daughter sleep. 1 month ago, I was terrified every night, imagining all the things that could go wrong. And now? James asked. Maria gestured to the room, the artwork, the books, the checkerboard, the bulletin board with its proudly displayed test. Now she has all of you. Now we both do. They heard a car pull up outside, its headlights sweeping across the window. Just another customer at the gas station, one of hundreds that pass through every day. But in here, in this converted break room, something extraordinary had taken root and grown. You know, Frank said, I've been managing this place for 10 years. Never thought it could be more than just a gas station. Funny how things work out, Nancy mused. Not funny, James corrected. Right. Things worked out right. Sarah stirred slightly, mumbling something about Jupiter's moons in her sleep. Maria gathered her daughter in her arms, strong from years of lifting patience and carrying hope. Same time tomorrow, she asked, though she already knew the answer. We'll be here, they all said, in different words but with the same meaning. Because that was what family did. The kind of family that forms in unexpected places, born not of blood but of choice. The kind that turns a gas station break room into a sanctuary, strangers into protectors, and a scared little girl in the rain into a star student with a constellation of guardians around her. As Maria carried Sarah out to their car, the gas station's lights glowed steady and bright against the dark sky. Inside, James and the others cleaned up, preparing for tomorrow, knowing that what they had built here was stronger than steel, more precious than gold, and as natural as breathing. It wasn't just a happy ending. It was a new beginning, written in homework assignments and checker games, in shared snacks and small kindnesses, in the simple, profound truth that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose, and who choose us in return.